Hey guys, it's Rogaway here and I'm back with another tutorial, and today we are looking at the basics of 3D modeling using Blender, and we're on the Mac desktop Mac interface here. And in case you haven't done much 3D modeling, basically if I did a search here, which I did, of 3D modeling, all 3D modeling is based on a mesh, a polygon mesh, which creates objects that we recognize as something, whether it's a character or a vehicle or an object in this real world or a fictional object. And one way to think of it is you are sculpting this mesh and making it look recognizable to the person looking at it through modeling and textures and coloring and animating at the end. And that's really the basis of 3D modeling or 3D design, I guess you could say, because modeling is just one part of it. We're going to be using Blender, which is a great program. It's totally free, so if you want to try this at home, you can. And you may have to search for it because it probably will not be on your dock by default, but just do a search for Blender and load it up, and I'll just show you how it looks when it starts up because it's a little different than what I just showed you there. So I'll go Blender, load it up, and this is what you're going to see. This window. Now, this window just basically gives you an overview of the program, gives you some manual and website links and all that. But we're going to actually click outside of that, and we're going to see an object here. It's just a square on our plane right now with nothing around it. Now, I'm going to kind of give you an overview of the interface that we're looking at. This window here is where all the sort of editing takes place. Over on the right-hand side, we got tons of little pellets in here that we'll go into in later videos. But for right now, the ones that you can look at are the sizes of the object over on the side here. We can see all the objects that are in the world right now. And along the bottom, we've got our timeline. So when we are doing animation, we can see how our camera is moving around the scene. On the left-hand side, we got all our important tools, ways that we can transform and create new objects is all available along that left-hand side, and we'll be looking at that as well. But before we even do anything, before we get started, we are going to have to set some of our preferences to some custom settings so we're all using the same shortcuts. So we're going to go to File, we're going to go to User Preferences, and you're going to get this window that pops up. And we're going to go to Input. What I like to do is, right off the hop, I always turn on Emulate 3-button mouse, because a lot of times you'll only have a 2-button mouse. Turn this on, it'll make life easier. In all of these little pull-downs, you're going to see one that says 3D View. It is the 6th one down. You're going to click this arrow. And inside of there, there's going to be a ton of other ones, but we're going to go to the very first one that says 3D View, again, global this time. And we're going to set a few of the keys to custom keys on the keyboard. First one we're going to set is Rotate View. And the way that this works is you click the gray block to the right, and it's going to ask you what key you want to use for rotating the view. So click there. We're going to hold Control, and we're going to press the right mouse button. So you should see that this becomes Control Right Mouse. The next one we're going to change is right underneath it. It says Move View. We're going to click that one, and we're going to press the space bar. All right, so we have just set 2 options for rotating the view and moving the view. And we're going to see how that works in a second. And that's all we're going to set for custom keys right now. We'll come back to this later on in another tutorial, but for now, that's all we're going to do. We're going to close this up. All right, so We are in a 3D workspace here, and we are looking at a digital version of a 3D sort of world. And the thing that makes it 3D is that we have three axes. Okay, we have the Z axis, we have the Y axis, and we've got the X axis, the Y axis, and the Z axis. And these are highlighted by the colors red, green, and blue. And if we want to zoom in on this cube that they've given us, we can use the scroll wheel in the middle of our mouse to zoom in and out to get closer to this cube or further away, depending on how close we want to be. If we want to change our view, if we want to look at this cube from a different view, we can use the numpad keys, and those are found on the right-hand side of your keyboard. They're the keys from 1 to 9. So if we press 1, for example, we are now in front view. If we press 3, we're in right view. If we press 7, we're in top view. And if we press 0, we are in camera view. All right, at any time if we want to go back, we can press the same key to jump back to the last view. Now, okay, so let's say we're in front view and we're looking at this object and we want to see some sort of dimension to it. Well, remember the keys that we just set in our user preferences. If we hold the space bar, we can now move our view. All right, we can now move around our view. And if we hold the control key and we right click and hold that, we can now rotate our view. Okay, so now we're able to manipulate our environment a little bit here and start moving things around. Now the reason it's so important to be able to switch between the top, right, and the top, the front, and the right is because a lot of times in 3D space, it's easy to get confused and to forget which way objects are facing or even how close objects are in relation to other objects. Only those set views will show you accurately where those objects are. So let's say we've got this cube and we want to actually move it around now. We want to actually, put it somewhere else. Well, the shortcut for that is the G key. And if you press G, I just remember it by thinking of the word grab. If I press G, I can now take this cube and move it around. By the way, if I ever click off of the cube or I go somewhere else and I deselect it by accident, the way that you reselect an object is not by left clicking it. It's by right clicking it. That's how you select objects in Blender. You right click them and now it's the selected object. So let's press G again. Let's say I don't want to move this object in all three axes at once. Maybe I only want this object to move in the X axis. So right now I have G and I'm moving it. If I press X, that will lock the movement to only the X axis. If I press the Y key, now it's only locked to the Y axis. And if I press the Z or Z key, now it is only locked to the Z axis. All right, so that's pretty handy. Once we start building shapes and once we start making complex objects, a lot of times we don't want the objects to be moving across all three axes. Let me give you an example. Let's say I wanted to take this block and move it back further on this axis, but I didn't use the Y axis lock. So I'm going to press G. And I'm going to try to put it over there as best as I can. Let's say like that. Now in this view, that looks like it moved over on the Y axis nicely. But look what happens once we rotate our view. We can see that it didn't actually move along the Y axis. It moved in the Z axis, it moved in the X axis, and the Y axis, and now it's just kind of floating above that line. Not what we wanted. All right, so I'm going to press Command Z and I'm going to undo that. Now let's compare. If I press G and then I press Y and I slide it this way and I rotate it, now you can see that it has slid along the green line perfectly, exactly where we wanted it. I'm going to press Command Z just to undo that. So that is how you move objects. That's how you can move them along the certain axes. Let's say we wanted to make this block bigger. Let's say this block had to be larger for some reason. We're using it for a specific purpose. This is where we would use the S shortcut. So S is for scale, and that will allow us to enlarge or shrink the object by sliding left and right. Now we get the same issue here. Maybe we only want it to scale in one axis. Maybe we only want it to scale in the x-axis. So if I press X, now it's only scaling the block in the x-axis. Maybe I want it to scale in the y-axis. So now I'm scaling it in the y-axis only. And I got Z as an option, and that will enlarge or shrink the block in the Z-axis. All right, so this gives us control over the shape of the object and how it scales based on just one axis. All right, so you can see how that is pretty handy. Starting with just a cube, we can really change the shape of it and make new objects just by scaling that object in different axes. So I'm going to undo that. The third important thing for us to do with the objects that we create is to rotate our objects. So let's say we want to rotate the object and we don't want it perfectly straight up and down. Shortcut for that, you could probably predict, is R. R will allow us to rotate the object in the axes of our choice. Again, if we just press R, it'll rotate in all axes. We have the same options with the X, the Y, and the Z, depending on how we want this object to rotate. All right, so that is very powerful. It allows us to have a lot of control over the objects and how we rotate them, how we move them, and how we scale them so that we can get them lined up perfectly depending on what we're building. All right, now let's say I don't want a cube. Let's say I would rather have a sphere or a triangle or something, a pyramid instead. Well, to delete an object, you simply press the X key. And it'll say, okay, you want to delete? Click the delete, and that object will disappear. Now, in order to create a new object, along the left side here, you'll see these tabs. And the one that says create will allow you to create new shapes. These are called primitive objects. Primitive objects are starting objects for more complex shapes. So if I want a sphere, I simply click it, and I can do the same thing to the sphere as I did with the cube, and I can adjust where that object is, how big it is, and all sorts of cool stuff in order to get it lined up maybe with other objects to create new shapes. Anyways, this is part one. That's the overview of the basic tools of Blender. From these very basic tools and basic commands, you can make simple objects using primitive shapes. And this is a good starting point when you are working in 3D, because a lot of times you'll need a starting point for your complex objects, and primitives are a great way to start. Anyways, I hope you found that useful. Make sure to practice this. 3D can be a little frustrating at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's a lot of fun. Till next time, thanks for watching.